Take what's yours and leave. Those 5 words echoed through the marble lobby of Premier Financial Advisory like a death sentence. Richard Brennan stood behind his mahogany desk, Italian suit pressed to perfection, gold cufflinks catching the morning light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. His smirk was the kind that belonged in a villain's handbook, cold, calculated, and completely convinced of its own superiority. I stared back at him, my resignation letter still warm in my hand, though I hadn't planned on using it quite like this. The morning had started with promise. I'd walked into our weekly partners meeting with a presentation that should have changed everything. Our Q3 numbers were extraordinary, client retention up 47%, assets under management climbing past $850 million, and our boutique firm had just landed 3 Fortune 500 corporate accounts that our competitors had been chasing for years. My name was on every single one of those wins. I'm Donna Smith. 42 years old, 15 years in wealth management, and for the last 8 years, I'd been the backbone of Premier Financial. Not the face, Richard made sure he was always the face, but the architect. I built client relationships the old-fashioned way, with trust, competence, and genuine care for their financial futures. While Richard networked at country clubs and posed for industry magazine photos, I was the one working weekends, taking calls from panicked clients during market dips, and personally reviewing every portfolio to ensure our strategies aligned with their life goals. Premier Financial occupied the top 3 floors of the Meridian building in downtown Portland. Glass, steel, and prestige wrapped in a package that screamed success to anyone walking through our doors. Richard loved to take credit for our prime location and strategic positioning, but he'd never mentioned how we'd ended up there. That morning's meeting should have been a celebration. Instead, it became a public execution. "Donna, your approach is outdated," Richard had announced, cutting me off mid-presentation. "These numbers look good on paper, but we're not a mom-and-pop shop anymore. We need to think bigger, bolder, more aggressive." The conference room fell silent. Sarah Martinez, our compliance officer, shifted uncomfortably in her seat. James Chen, our top analyst, stared at his laptop screen like it contained the secrets of the universe. Nobody made eye contact. With me, Richard continued his demolition with the precision of a surgeon and the empathy of a brick wall. "Your client-first philosophy is holding us back. We need to maximize revenue per client, not coddle them through every market fluctuation." The presentation you just gave? It's exactly the kind of thinking that keeps small firms small. I'd spent 3 weeks preparing that presentation. Market analysis, client testimonials, projected growth models based on sustainable practices rather than predatory fee structures. Everything backed by data, everything focused on long-term success rather than quarterly flash. "Richard," I said, keeping my voice steady, "those outdated methods just brought in $180 million in new assets this quarter alone. The Hartwell Group specifically chose us because of our personalized approach. The Morrison Family Trust stayed with us during the March volatility because they're comfortable," he interrupted, waving his hand dismissively. "Comfortable doesn't scale, Donna. I've been talking with some consultants from New York. Real growth strategists. They've showed me what aggressive client acquisition looks like. What modern wealth management should be." My stomach dropped. Richard had been taking more business trips lately, always vague about the details, always returning with new buzzwords and fresh contempt for everything we'd built together. "We're implementing new protocols starting Monday," he announced to the room, though his eyes stayed locked on mine. "Higher minimum investments, streamlined service packages, and automated portfolio management for accounts under $2 million. Efficiency over hand-holding." James Chen finally looked up. "Richard, that's going to alienate at least 60% of our current client base." "Exactly," Richard smiled like he'd just solved world hunger. "We keep the profitable ones, ditch the rest. More time to focus on real money." That's when I realized what this really was. Not a strategy session. A hostile takeover of the company culture I'd spent 8 years nurturing. "You're talking about abandoning clients who've trusted us for years," I said, standing up slowly. "People who came to us because we promised them something different than the big corporate firms. Mrs. Peterson has been with us since her husband died 5 years ago. The Yamamoto family business account." "Are you having trouble hearing me, Donna?" Richard's voice cut through the room like broken glass. "This is the new direction. If you can't adapt, maybe you should consider whether this is the right fit for you anymore." The room went dead silent. Sarah actually held her breath. That's when I made my mistake. I should have stayed quiet, nodded, played along until I could figure out my next move. Instead, I opened my laptop and pulled up our client retention dashboard, the one that showed exactly whose efforts had built our reputation, whose relationships had generated our revenue, whose late-night crisis management had kept us profitable when other firms were hemorrhaging accounts. Richard, these numbers tell a different story, I said, projecting the data onto the conference room screen. 93% of our revenue comes from clients I personally brought in or retained. The Hartwell Group, Morrison Family Trust, Pacific Northwest Teachers Union Pension Fund, Cedar Grove Development, that's enough. Richard's voice dropped to a whisper, which somehow felt more dangerous than shouting. You seem to have forgotten something important, Donna. This is my firm. Those are my clients. You work for me. I stared at him, this man I'd considered a business partner for 8 years, this man I'd helped build something meaningful with, and I saw nothing familiar in his eyes. Just cold calculation and something else, fear. He was afraid of what those numbers showed, afraid of what would happen if our clients knew who was really responsible for their success. You're right, I said quietly, closing my laptop. I do work here. But those relationships, that trust, that reputation, I built those. Me. Not us. Me. The smirk returned to his face, sharper now. Is that so? Well, then maybe it's time you took what's yours and left. See how far those relationships get you without Premier Financial's reputation behind them. The room felt like it was holding its breath. Richard leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, probably thinking he'd just won some decisive victory. But something electric was settling in my chest. Not shame, not defeat. Clarity. All right, I said, my voice perfectly even. I will. As I gathered my papers and walked toward the door, Richard called out one more time, his voice dripping with mock concern. Oh, and Donna? Good luck starting over at 42. I'm sure someone out there needs a consultant who specializes in emotional hand-holding. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to see his face to know he thought he'd crushed me. But as I walked through that marble lobby toward the elevator, my mind was already spinning, already connecting dots that Richard had never bothered to notice. He'd told me to take what was mine and leave. The thing is, Richard had never asked what exactly belonged to me. He'd never bothered to read the fine print of our original partnership agreement. He'd never wondered why our lease on the Meridian building was structured so unusually, or why certain client contracts contained specific clauses about service continuity. Richard Brennan thought he owned Premier Financial. He was about to learn the difference between running something and owning it. That night, I sat in my home office surrounded by 8 years of carefully organized files. Not company files, those belonged to Premier Financial. These were my personal records. Contracts I'd negotiated, legal documents I'd filed, business licenses I'd maintained, and most importantly, agreements I'd signed back when Richard and I had been actual partners instead of employer and employee. The thing about being dismissed is that it either breaks your spirit or sharpens your focus. I pulled out a manila folder I hadn't opened in years, labeled Meridian Building, Original Agreements. 8 years ago, Premier Financial didn't exist. Richard Brennan had been working as a senior advisor for a large corporate firm, making good money but dreaming of independence. I'd been in the same position at a different company, but with one crucial difference: I had capital and I had connections. My father had been a commercial real estate developer before his death, and he'd left me a modest inheritance along with something more valuable: relationships in Portland's business community and a deep understanding of how real estate deals actually work. When Richard approached me about starting our own firm, I'd been the one with the resources to make it happen. I found what I was looking for on page 7 of the original partnership agreement, buried in legal language that most people skip over. Property acquisition and lease agreements shall be structured through D. Smith Holdings LLC, with Premier Financial Advisory maintaining operational control under terms specified in Addendum C. Addendum C. I smiled as I flipped to it, remembering the conversation with our attorney that Richard had missed because of a golf tournament. In the event of partnership dissolution or termination of employment, the property management entity retains full discretionary authority over lease agreements and may exercise termination clauses with 90 days' notice to subletting parties. Richard thought he was my boss. He'd spent 3 years treating me like an employee, restructuring our profit-sharing arrangement, gradually edging me out of decision-making processes. What he'd never realized was that Premier Financial Advisory didn't own the building we operated from. D. Smith Holdings did. My holding company. The one I'd established to purchase the lease rights when the Meridian building converted from commercial rentals to privately managed suites. I owned the building. And Premier Financial was my tenant, but that wasn't the most interesting discovery that night. I pulled out another folder, this one labeled Client Service Agreements, Personal Copies. Every major client we'd signed had insisted on specific language about service continuity. Not just any service, personal service from their primary advisor. That advisor, in 94% of our cases, was me. The Hartwell Group's contract specified that their primary advisor was Donna Smith, with Premier Financial Advisory serving as the institutional framework. The Morrison Family Trust had similar language. So did Pacific Northwest Teachers Union, Cedar Grove Development, and 15 other major accounts representing over $600 million in assets under management. These weren't Premier Financial's clients who happened to work with me. These were my clients who had chosen to work through Premier Financial's infrastructure. There's a profound legal difference between those two things. I spent the weekend making phone calls. Not to clients, not yet. To lawyers, to real estate professionals, to former colleagues who'd moved on to start their own practices. By Sunday evening, I had a complete picture of what Richard had never bothered to understand. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzling. Typical Pacific Northwest weather that matched my mood perfectly. I walked into Premier Financial at exactly 9 a.m., carrying a leather portfolio and wearing my best suit. Sarah Martinez looked up from her desk, surprised to see me. Donna? Richard said you'd resigned on Friday. I'm here to discuss transition arrangements, I replied, which was technically true. Richard's office door was closed, but I could hear him on a conference call with his growth strategists from New York. Something about acquisition targets and market consolidation. I settled into the waiting area and opened my portfolio, reviewing the documents I'd spent the weekend preparing. At 10:15, his door finally opened. Richard emerged with his phone still pressed to his ear, gesturing dramatically as he spoke. Exactly. That's the kind of aggressive mindset we need. Old-school relationship building is dead weight in today's market. He noticed me sitting there and his expression shifted from confusion to irritation. He ended his call and walked over, clearly not happy about the interruption. Donna, I thought we settled this on Friday. If you're here to negotiate some kind of severance package, I'm here to discuss the transition timeline, I interrupted, standing up and handing him a thick envelope. These are the documents you'll need to review. He opened the envelope and pulled out the first page, a formal notice of lease termination for the Meridian building, dated 90 days from today. His face went through several interesting color changes as he read. What the hell is this supposed to be? Exactly what it says. D. Smith Holdings, the building's lease management entity, is terminating Premier Financial's sublease agreement. You have 90 days to find alternative office space. Richard stared at me like I'd just announced the moon was actually made of cheese. This is some kind of joke. Premier Financial has been here for 8 years. Premier Financial has been subleasing from D. Smith Holdings for 8 years. I'm D. Smith Holdings. I own this space, Richard. You rent it from me. The color drained from his face as the implications started sinking in. That's impossible. I would have known, you would have known if you'd bothered to read the partnership agreements you signed. Or if you'd ever wondered why our lease terms were so favorable. Or if you'd paid attention during any of the legal meetings you kept skipping for golf tournaments. I handed him the second document in the envelope, Client Service Continuation Notices. These are formal notifications to our major clients about service transition. Since their contracts specify personal advisory relationships, they'll need to decide whether to continue working with me at my new location or stay with Premier Financial under new management. Richard was scanning the documents now, his hands actually shaking slightly. You can't do this. These are our clients, these are my clients, Richard. Read the contracts. The Hartwell Group specifically contracted with me personally, using Premier Financial as institutional support. Morrison Family Trust, same thing. Cedar Grove Development, Pacific Northwest Teachers Union, they all have personal service clauses. I pulled out the final document, Incorporation Papers for Smith Wealth Management Group, filed 3 days ago. They'll be receiving transition notices this week, along with information about my new firm. They're free to choose where they want to continue their financial advisory relationships. Richard sank into the nearest chair, finally understanding what was happening. You're stealing my company. I'm taking what's mine, just like you suggested. The building is mine. The client relationships are mine. The reputation that attracted those clients is mine. I leaned forward slightly. Premier Financial is yours, Richard. The name, the current lease obligations, the overhead costs, the New York consultants, all yours. Congratulations. He looked up at me with something approaching panic. The staff, Sarah, James, the others, will receive job offers from Smith Wealth Management Group this week. Market rate salaries, equity participation, and a work environment where client service isn't considered hand-holding. I stood up and smoothed my jacket. But they're free to stay here if they prefer your new aggressive approach. Richard was quiet for a long moment, his mind clearly racing through the financial implications. Without the major client accounts, without the building, without the key staff members, Premier Financial would be a shell company with expensive overhead and a rapidly declining revenue stream. "This isn't over," he said finally. "Actually, it is," I replied. "You told me to take what was mine and leave. I'm doing exactly that. The difference is, you never bothered to understand what was actually mine." As I walked toward the door, I turned back one final time. "Oh, and Richard? You might want to call your New York consultants. Something tells me you're going to need all the aggressive growth strategies you can get." The phone started ringing at 7 a.m. the next morning. Margaret Hartwell, CEO of Hartwell Group, wasn't one to waste time with pleasantries. "Donna, I got your transition notice." "What the hell happened over there?" I'd been dreading this conversation and looking forward to it in equal measure. Margaret was sharp, decisive, and had built her family's construction business from regional contractor to Pacific Northwest powerhouse over 20 years. She'd chosen Premier Financial specifically because she wanted advisors who understood the difference between sustainable growth and reckless expansion. "Margaret, I'll give it to you straight. Richard and I had fundamental disagreements about client service philosophy. He wants to move toward automated portfolio management and higher minimum investments. I believe your account deserves personal attention and customized strategies." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "And you're starting your own firm?" "I am. Smith Wealth Management Group. Same services you've been receiving, same personal attention, same commitment to long-term wealth building rather than short-term trading gains." "Where are you setting up?" This was the question I'd been waiting for. "Actually, Margaret, that's interesting. I'm keeping the Meridian building location. Same offices, same address, just different company name on the door." Another pause, longer. "This time, you bought the building?" "I've owned it for 8 years. Premier Financial was subletting from my holding company." Margaret's laugh was sharp and appreciative. "Well, I'll be damned. Richard never mentioned that detail." Richard wasn't aware of that detail. "Consider Hartwell Group transferred to Smith Wealth Management. When do we start?" By the end of that week, 17 major clients had made the same decision. The Morrison Family Trust, Pacific Northwest Teachers Union, Cedar Grove Development, one by one, they chose continuity over uncertainty. It wasn't just about the money, though the financial implications were staggering. These clients had trusted me with their most important financial decisions for years. When forced to choose between following that trust or staying with an institutional name, Trust One, Sarah Martinez knocked on my office door, now officially my office, the following Monday morning. She looked nervous but determined. "Donna, I know you made job offers to the staff. I wanted to talk to you about the compliance officer position." "What about it?" "Richard's been difficult since you left. He's pushing through policy changes without proper review, ignoring regulatory requirements, and he fired James on Friday." I leaned back in my chair. "He fired James? For what?" "For questioning the legal implications of his client acquisition strategy. Apparently James pointed out that some of Richard's new protocols might violate fiduciary duty standards." Sarah sat down across from my desk. "Donna, I've been in compliance for 12 years. I know what ethical wealth management looks like. And what Richard's planning isn't it. Are you accepting my offer?" "I'm accepting your offer. So is James, if it's still open. And Maria from operations, and David from client services. Actually," she paused, "everyone except Richard's assistant and 2 of the new people he brought in from his consulting group." I nodded slowly, processing what this meant. Premier Financial was hemorrhaging talent at the exact moment they needed it most. "What about Richard? How's he handling the transition?" Sarah's expression shifted. "That's actually what I wanted to talk to you about. He's been making calls to clients, telling them you're violating non-compete agreements, that your new firm isn't properly licensed, that they should be careful about moving their accounts." This didn't surprise me. Desperate people make desperate moves. What exactly is he saying? That you're operating illegally, that client funds aren't protected, that Smith Wealth Management is some kind of fly-by-night operation. Sarah pulled out her phone and showed me a voice message. "Margaret Hartwell forwarded this to me. She thought you should hear it." Richard's voice filled my office, tight with barely controlled panic. "Margaret, this is Richard Brennan at Premier Financial. I wanted to personally reach out about the concerning developments with our former associate. Donna Smith's new venture hasn't been properly vetted by regulatory authorities, and I have serious concerns about fiduciary compliance and fund security. As your long-standing financial advisor, I feel obligated to warn you about the risks of moving your account to an untested startup." I let the message finish, then looked up at Sarah. How many clients received calls like this? All of them. And Margaret wasn't the only one who forwarded the message to us. Richard's been busy. This was exactly what I'd expected and exactly what I'd prepared for. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a folder labeled Regulatory Compliance, Smith Wealth Management Group. Sarah, as compliance officer, I want you to review these documents. Securities licenses, fiduciary insurance, regulatory registrations, fund custodial agreements with Portland First Bank, and audit schedules with Morrison and Associates. I handed her the folder. Everything properly filed, everything compliant, everything legitimate. Sarah flipped through the documents, her expression shifting from concern to relief to something approaching admiration. You filed all of this before you even left Premier Financial? I filed all of this the weekend after Richard told me to take what's mine and leave. I've been planning transition contingencies for months. The phone rang as Sarah was reviewing the compliance documentation. Margaret Hartwell again, but this time she sounded amused rather than concerned. Donna, I just got the most interesting call from Richard Brennan. He seemed quite worried about my financial security. Margaret, I can address any specific concerns. Oh, I'm not concerned. I'm impressed. I did a little research after Richard's call. Turns out your new firm has better regulatory standing than most established practices. More insurance, more oversight, more transparent fee structures. Margaret paused. But I have a question about something else. Is it true that you own the building Premier Financial operates from? Yes. And Richard's been your tenant for 8 years without realizing it? Yes. Margaret's laugh was pure delight. Donna, I've been in business for 25 years, and that's the most beautiful strategic play I've ever seen. Richard's over there scrambling to find new office space while you're conducting business as usual from the same location with better credentials and his former staff. Margaret, I'm recommending you to 3 other business owners I know. People who've been looking for advisors who actually understand long-term planning rather than quarterly gambling. Expect some calls. Those calls started coming within days. Business owners who'd grown tired of firms that treated them like numbers on a spreadsheet, retirees who wanted advisors who actually returned their phone calls. Young professionals who appreciated detailed explanations rather than condescending dismissals, but the most satisfying call came from an unexpected source. Ms. Smith? This is Catherine Morrison from Morrison and Associates. We're the accounting firm that handles your regulatory audits. Yes, Catherine. Is there an issue with our filing schedules? No, quite the opposite. We received a rather frantic call from Richard Brennan at Premier Financial. He wanted to hire us for an emergency audit and compliance review. Catherine's voice carried a note of professional amusement. He seemed to be under the impression that our firm might have some inside information about irregularities in your practice. I could picture Richard making that call, probably convinced that he could find some technical violation that would undermine my new firm's credibility. What did you tell him? I told him that Morrison and Associates maintains strict confidentiality with all clients, but I also mentioned that we'd be happy to provide references for Smith Wealth Management Group if any potential clients requested them. Catherine paused. Mr. Brennan didn't seem pleased with that response. I imagine not. Ms. Smith, in 20 years of auditing financial advisory practices, I've rarely seen such thorough compliance preparation. Your documentation is exemplary, your fiduciary insurance coverage exceeds industry standards, and your client service protocols are textbook perfect. Whatever Mr. Brennan was hoping to find, it doesn't exist. 3 weeks later, I was reviewing quarterly projections when Sarah knocked on my door with an expression I couldn't read. Donna, you need to see this. She handed me a printed email from Portland Business Journal. The subject line read, Premier Financial Advisory announces closure and asset transfer. I scanned the article quickly. Richard had sold Premier Financial's remaining client accounts to a large corporate firm based in Seattle. The Meridian Building offices were being vacated. Remaining staff had been laid off with minimal severance. Richard himself was relocating to Phoenix to pursue new opportunities in emerging markets. There's more, Sarah said, handing me another document. This came through official channels an hour ago. It was a formal letter from Premier Financial's attorney, addressed to Smith Wealth Management Group. Richard was transferring ownership of the Premier Financial name, trademark, and remaining business assets to my firm for the sum of $1, contingent on assumption of remaining lease obligations and vendor contracts. I read the letter twice, making sure I understood what was happening. Richard wasn't just closing his firm, he was essentially giving it to me. The name he'd been so protective of, the brand he'd spent 8 years building, the reputation he'd tried to weaponize against me, all of it transferred for $1. And the promise that I'd handle his remaining financial obligations. Why would he do this? Sarah asked. I thought about it for a moment. Because the alternative is bankruptcy. If he just closes Premier Financial, he's personally liable for the remaining lease on office space he can't afford, vendor contracts he can't fulfill, and potential lawsuits from clients whose accounts he mismanaged during the transition. By transferring everything to us, those obligations become our responsibility, but we also get the legal protection of being the successor firm. Are you going to accept it? I looked around my office, the same office I'd worked in for 8 years, now officially mine in every sense. Through the window, I could see downtown Portland stretching toward the river, full of businesses that needed financial guidance they could trust. Draw up the paperwork. We'll take the Premier Financial name as a subsidiary of Smith Wealth Management Group. Some of our older clients might prefer the familiar branding, and there's no point in wasting a decent reputation just because Richard couldn't live up to it. That evening, as I was preparing to leave the office, my phone rang one final time. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but the voice was unmistakably Richard's. Donna. He sounded tired, older somehow. I assume you got the transfer documents. I did. I suppose you think you've won. I considered that for a moment. Richard, I don't think this was ever about winning or losing. It was about understanding what we were actually building here. There was a long pause on his end. Those New York consultants, they promised me we could triple our revenue in 18 months. Aggressive client acquisition, automated services, reduced overhead. And it turns out that when you strip away everything personal about financial advisory work, you're left with nothing that can't be done cheaper by a computer program. The clients who stayed after you left, they left anyway when they realized they were just account numbers in a database. I didn't say anything. Sometimes the most important conversations happen in the silences. I never understood what you were doing here, Richard continued. I thought relationship building was inefficient. I thought personal service was a waste of time. I thought growth meant getting bigger, not getting better. Richard, no, let me finish. You were right. About the clients, about the approach. About what actually creates value in this business. I was so focused on looking like a success that I forgot how to actually be successful. I walked to my office window, looking out at the city lights beginning to flicker on as evening settled over Portland. What are you going to do in Phoenix? Start over, I guess. Hopefully with a better understanding of what actually matters. He paused again. Donna, for what it's worth, I'm sorry. You deserved better from me. Your clients deserved better. Everyone deserved better. Richard, I appreciate that. Take care of Premier Financial's reputation, will you? It might not mean much now, but it meant something once. I will. After he hung up, I sat in my office for a while, thinking about the strange journey that had brought me to this moment. 8 years ago, I'd helped Richard build something meaningful. 3 months ago, he'd told me to take what was mine and leave. Now I was sitting in the same office, running the same business, serving the same clients, but everything had changed. My phone buzzed with a text message from Margaret Hartwell. Donna, just saw the PBJ article about Premier Financial. Coffee tomorrow? I have 3 referrals for you, and I want to hear this whole story from the beginning. I smiled and typed back, coffee sounds perfect. And Margaret? The story's just getting started. 6 months later, I stood at the podium of the Pacific Northwest Financial Planning Association's annual conference. The banquet hall was packed with advisors, planners, and industry professionals from across the region. My keynote topic, building sustainable client relationships in an automation-driven market. Halfway through my presentation, I spotted a familiar face in the audience. Richard sat near the back, taking notes, looking genuinely engaged with the material. He'd driven up from Phoenix, apparently, to hear what I had to say about the business. We'd once built together. I closed my presentation with something I hadn't planned to say, but suddenly felt necessary. The most expensive mistake any business leader can make is assuming that efficiency and effectiveness are the same thing. You can automate transactions, but you can't automate trust. You can streamline processes, but you can't streamline relationships. And sometimes, the person telling you that relationships matter isn't trying to hold you back, they're trying to show you what real success looks like. The applause was warm and sustained. Afterward, during the networking reception, Richard approached me near the coffee station. Good speech, he said simply. Thank you for coming. I wanted to see what you'd built. And I wanted to apologize again, in person. I looked at him, really looked. The expensive suit was gone, replaced by something more modest but better fitting. The aggressive confidence had been replaced by something quieter but more genuine. He looked like someone who'd learned the difference between being impressive and being effective. How's Phoenix treating you? I'm working with small business owners, mostly. One-on-one financial planning, retirement strategies, basic investment advice. He smiled, and for the first time in years, it reached his eyes. Turns out I'm pretty good at the relationship building part when I actually try. I'm glad to hear that. Donna, I know this is probably too little, too late, but I learned something important from watching what you built. Success isn't about taking up more space in the market. It's about creating more value in the space you occupy. I nodded. Richard, you were never a bad advisor. You were just trying to be something you weren't. And you were trying to show me who I actually was. He extended his hand. Thank you for that. Even if it took me way too long to understand it. I shook his hand, and for the first time since that confrontation in the conference room, I felt like I was talking to the person I'd originally partnered with 8 years ago. Good luck in Phoenix, Richard. Good luck with everything here. And, Donna? Take care of what we built. You were always better at that than I was. As I drove home that evening, I thought about the strange circularity of the whole experience. Richard had told me to take what was mine and leave, thinking he was dismissing me from something he owned. Instead, he'd inadvertently given me permission to claim what had always been mine: the relationships, the reputation, the results that came from caring more about long-term success than short-term flash. Smith Wealth Management Group now manages over $900 million in client assets. We employ 12 people in a collaborative environment where client service isn't considered inefficient hand-holding. We still occupy the Meridian building, though we've expanded to a 4th floor. And yes, we kept the Premier Financial name as a subsidiary, honoring the reputation that meant something before ego got in the way. Sometimes people ask me if I planned the whole thing, if I always knew I owned the building, if I deliberately structured the client contracts to be portable, if I anticipated Richard's eventual meltdown. The truth is simpler and more complex than that. I didn't plan to take over the company. I just planned to protect myself and the clients who trusted me. When someone tells you to take what's yours and leave, the most important thing isn't the leaving part, it's understanding what's actually yours in the first place, and sometimes, what's yours is bigger than you ever imagined. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.